Hey, let's turn this morning to Daniel chapter 11, please. Daniel chapter 11. If anybody needs a Bible, I encourage you this morning, as much as any morning ever, to put your hand up and have one delivered to you, because this is very, very, that needs your full attention this morning. Chapter 11 lends itself to be extremely technical, and also, we'll be honest, it lends itself as well to be very tedious. And so let me ask, how many of you guys enjoy history? You like history? Okay. How many of you don't really care for history all that much? Okay. This is going to be a challenge for you guys this morning, okay? I'm going to be honest. It's going to be crazy, but I'm hoping by the time we're done, not that I can convince you to like history more, but you're going to love his story more. And as we go into chapter 11. So we talked about this last time we were together. Last Sunday we had Ben Corson. What a blast. What a hoot. It's so much fun. High energy. If you were here and that was your first Sunday last week, you will not get that same energy today or probably ever again. Ben is one of a kind. But the last time we were together, we were in Daniel chapter 10. And as we mentioned, Daniel chapter 10, 11, and 12 are all part of this one last recorded prophecy that is given to Daniel to be given to us. And this last prophecy in Daniel chapter 11 specifically is one of, if not the most specific prophecies in the Bible. And it is also has some of the most provable evidence that it's accurate as well. And so chapter 11 is said to contain in these 45 verses, said to contain 135 fulfilled prophecies. Can you imagine that? I can't say like one thing I know for certain that's going to happen tomorrow. And chapter 11 has 135 fulfilled prophecies. We aren't going to address all of them, but we will highlight some of them. But because of its incredible accuracy, as you can imagine, critics of the Bible and Christianity and just divine nature in general have really made chapter 11 a target of their attacks. And they insist, because it's so accurate, it's undeniable how accurate it portrays history. And since that they know that is true, the only other option they have is to say that, well, it must have been written after the events took place. And so this prophecy is going to lay out a prophetic history from the reign of the most powerful ruler in the world at Daniel's time, which was Darius the Persian, or Darius the Mede, all the way to the most powerful and final ruler in the world, who comes by many titles in the Bible, but we know him most commonly as the Antichrist. And so it goes all the way from Daniel's day all the way through to the Antichrist. Now in chapter 10, we received an introduction of sorts to this prophecy. Daniel had been seeking the Lord, calling out on the Lord, what was to become of his people as he was there in Babylon under the reign of Persia at the time. He says, what's going to happen to my people, to Israel? And so he set aside 21 days of fasting and prayer. At the end of that 21 days, he has an interaction with an angel who says, from the very first day you started praying, Daniel, I was sent to answer you. I heard your prayer. And then Daniel is told about the spiritual warfare that took place behind the scenes, unseen to him, that was taking place in the spiritual realm, that was intervening so he couldn't have this prayer answered immediately when he came to the Lord. And so in chapter 10, after explaining this delay, the angel says in verse 14, now I have come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the later days. For the vision refers to many days yet to come. And so chapter 10 then goes on and finishes describing Daniel and this angel's interaction. And now in chapter 11, Daniel's going to hear what is going to happen to his people. And for him, it is going to be many, many days into the future. And we'll get to that in a minute. But if you take notes, as I hinted at before, there's going to be plenty to take this morning. But quickly, for all of us, chapter 11, this prophecy that he receives is divides itself into two sections. And so it takes us, as I said, from the time of Daniel and Darius and the rise of the Persian Empire, which was in 539 BC. So it takes us from that point past the fall, well past Daniel's own life, past the fall of the Greek Empire, past the fall of this character that we've looked at extensively in chapter 8 and a little bit in chapter 9 called Antiochus Epiphanes, and that was in 164 BC. And so verses 1 through 35 cover a period of time of about 375 years. Now, some may think, well, if he's telling the future, why is he talking about these empires specifically? There's been lots of fascinating cultures and empires, and the Aztecs, the Mayans, all of those things were incredibly fascinating. What was going on in China has a rich history at that time. But this prophecy is about the empires and the cultures and the societies, as I read in verse 14 of chapter 10, that have directly to do with his people. And so as fascinating as what was going on in China at the time is, or in South America, this is about the nation of Israel and about the flow of history that comes through the events that are listed here in verses 1 through 35. So, section 1, verses 1 through 35, 539 BC to 164 BC. Section 2 is verse 36 through 45. And that takes us into our future, to this last ruler that will be in power when Jesus comes again, called the Antichrist. And so between verses 35 and 36, between these two sections, there is over a 2,000-year gap that takes place. Now, I want to tie this in. If you've been with us, you're going to understand where I'm going with this. If you're new over the last couple weeks, you might be a little bit left behind. I encourage you to watch or listen online. But if you've been with us thus far in Daniel, if you remember in Daniel chapter 9, we are given what is called Daniel's 70-week prophecy. The angel said 70 weeks of years are determined for your people and for the holy city. And so chapter 11, 1 through 35, are events and prophecies that fit within this first 69 sets of 7 years. The last part, verses 36 through 45 of chapter 11, deal with events that will take place in the 70th week of Daniel. And so again, there's this gap between the 69 sets of 7 years and the 70th 7 years. And also there's a gap in chapter 11 between verse 35 and 36. Are you guys doing okay? Because it's going to get so complicated, but it's going to be entertaining, I believe, as well. So, although we don't come to be entertained, right? Let's get that out of the way right here. We're here to learn the Word of God, and this is what He has for us, chapter 11. But because what we are going to cover today is so extensively history, it's all past tense, verses 1 through 35. From our vantage point, we look back, it has all taken place. It is going to feel a lot like you should be sitting at one of those chairs with a little wooden thing that comes out in front of you and pencil in hand and your spiral notebook ready. It's going to feel like that. But it's much more than a history lesson that we're getting in chapter 11. As fascinating, those of you who raised your hand and said, I like history, as fascinating as that is, it's much more than a history lesson. It's a prophecy lesson. It's a lesson about how this book is divinely authored, and it has its origins outside of time and space. Time is not bound to the words that go into this, and that God alone knows the end from the beginning and everything in between. And that's, I've already talked about the things in Psalm 119 about how great this book is. But the Bible is the only religious book there's ever been that dares to tell the future. No other religious book would dare put itself out on a limb like that. And the Bible here, especially in chapter 11, says, okay, I got 130 of them for you right here. Let's go. Let's do this. And so let's do this. Let's start. The angel continues talking to Daniel, and in the first couple verses here, in verse 2, he's going to describe 4 Persian kings. He says, also, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. And really, we talked about this 2 weeks ago. That kind of belongs as part of chapter 11. Now, verse 2. Now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. Okay, so Daniel is told here by the angel there's going to be 4 additional prominent kings that come to power in the Persian Empire, and the 4th will be wealthier and more powerful than the 3 who came before. And he's also told that he's going to stir up or incite this Grecian kingdom that isn't even a twinkle in anybody's eye yet. But these 3 kings, and the 4th that followed Cyrus, the first king, and Darius the Mede, his ruler. These 3 kings are, first, Cambyses, Cambyses. And maybe in the future, if you ask me, I'll spell them, or you can tell me later. Otherwise, I'll be doing a lot of spelling today. But the first is Cambyses II. The second was a king by the name of Bardia, also known as Smerdis. I don't know which one he preferred. They both don't sound great to me. But he only reigned for a couple months. And then third, there was Darius the First, also known as Darius the Great. And he's mentioned in Ezra 5 and 6, as well as in the book of Daniel. And then the 4th who came, this 4th one who's going to come, became very wealthy due to kingdom expansion and really heavy taxes. And his name was Xerxes the First. He's mentioned in the book of Esther, where he is called Ahasuerus. And it says that he would stir up Greece. And I find this really fascinating, and so I hope you do as well. I'm going to share it with you. Xerxes had this insatiable desire inside of him to defeat this up-and-coming Greek kingdom. And it was growing in power. Philip of Macedon was over there, all of that stuff, it was really growing. And his father was soundly defeated against the Greeks in the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC. Some of you understand that Marathon's a race. It's actually named after a historical event that took place. And so 10 years later, in 480 BC, Xerxes would try again to defeat the Greeks. And he led this famous battle against Leonidas and the 300 Spartans in the Battle of Thermopylae. And I will not encourage you to go watch 300 as a historical reference. But that famous battle did take place. On his way to Greece, Xerxes implemented a plan that was so crazy that it just might work, desiring to send this massive military from Asia into Europe, across, northwest Turkey. He sent an advance team and his navy there to meet him and the rest of the troops when they arrived to a place called Hellespont or Dardanelles. And maybe that rings a bell from your 10th grade world history. But over this stretch of water in the Mediterranean that is about a mile and a quarter between Turkey and Greece, he made a pontoon bridge of his naval ships side by side, each one side by side, all the way across this 1.25 miles. And they dropped anchor. They ran cables from one side to the other. They placed planks across every single ship all the way so that there was a plank in Turkey and there was a plank in Greece. He wanted to defeat the Greeks, and he had to get his military over there. On the planks, this was really well thought out. He put soil, he had soil dragged in and to put and patted down over top these planks. From the cables, he had branches hanging and foliage so that when the horses walked through, they wouldn't see the water and get startled. He wanted to send upwards of, some say, 2.5 million military personnel into Greece over this pontoon plan that he had. But when his army arrived, when the massive troops came, the bridge he found had been damaged by the current and by waves. And this is where Xerxes' craziness kicked in. He ordered that the men who built this pontoon bridge be executed, like it was their fault that the waves came up. But then he's like, maybe it is the waves' fault. And so he demanded that the ocean receive 300 lashes and get a hot branding to boot. We're going to show that ocean what's up. And so he then reconstructed the bridge, and his army was so huge it took 2 weeks for them to cross over this incredible thing. And so maybe some of you who raised your hand like, I hate history, are like, actually history's not so bad. It's not as bad as I remember. It's fascinating. It's incredible. But eventually he was defeated again like his father in Salamis. But the fact of the matter here, I say all that to say this, is that he did stir up the Greeks. When you send 2.5 million of your soldiers into our land, he stirred up the Greeks. And he stirred up what would become certainly the most famous Greek of them all, Alexander the Great. And he is not related to Cyrus the Great or Darius the Great, but Alexander is described here in verses 3 and 4. So now we go from the Persian Empire into the Greek Empire. It says, then a mighty king, who's Alexander, shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided towards the four winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others besides these. Now, Alexander the Great certainly was a mighty king. He became king at 20 years old, and immediately he set out to retaliate against the years and years of Persian aggression that they faced. And he succeeded in conquering the Persians and also the known world at the time. It stretched as far as Nepal, his empire did, all the way from Greece. And he died in Babylon in 332 BC at the age of 32. And we've had a couple times already the opportunity to talk about Alexander the Great and his death in Babylon in our study. But in his final moments, as it pertains to what we're studying here, he was asked who would inherit this massive kingdom from him. You're this young guy, 32 years old, you're obviously going to die. Who's going to take over for you? And his response was to the strong. Well, the strong was not, as it says here, his posterity. He had an infant son, and he had a son that would be born posthumously, and neither one of those were the strong. The strong were his four generals. Those are the ones that rose up, and they divided the kingdom exactly like it says here, to the four winds, to the four directions of the compass. And I'm going to list those off, and not just to impress you with more information, but because it's going to be pertinent to the rest of our study. The first was Cassander, and he had control of the area of Macedon and Greece. Then there was Lysimachus, who had modern-day Turkey. And then there was Seleucus. That's one that we need to pay attention to, Seleucus. And he was in control of Iran, what is today Iran, Iraq, and Syria. And that is directly north, if you can picture a map in your mind, directly north of Israel. And then there was Ptolemy, Ptolemy, and he had control of Egypt and Alexandria, which was named after Alexander the Great, all that. And that's directly south of Israel. Now, already, we're just a few verses in here, but this is all future events to Daniel. At the time that, as I mentioned, Daniel wrote this, Greece wasn't even a united kingdom. It was just clans fighting here and there. And here, he's not even talking about them becoming a united empire. He's talking about how that united empire is going to divide again after that. And it's these two dynasties of these last two generals that become the focus for much of these verses here. In verses 5 through 35, the Seleucid dynasty is north of Israel in Syria, and the Ptolemaic dynasty, which is south of the nation of Israel in Egypt. And these two dynasties fought each other for centuries year after year after year. They put the nasty in dynasty. I mean, it is rough. And the things that we're going to read here, it is a combination of the Hatfields and the McCoys meets Clash of the Titans meets All My Children. I mean, it is the craziest thing. You may think I'm exaggerating. I'm not. And if nothing else, you're going to leave this place, maybe not in love with history, but saying history is in fact crazier than fiction. So, because the Seleucids, I'll try to make some visuals for you, but the Seleucids are north of Israel and the Ptolemies were south of Israel, Israel found themselves sandwiched in the middle. Constantly, as they're warring century after century, Israel becomes their battleground. Israel becomes what they're fighting and reclaiming over and over for generations. And some of those noteworthy confrontations are listed for us here, and we begin with Ptolemy himself. Hang on to your hats. Verse 5, also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. Shortly after Alexander the Great's death and these four generals took control, it's the Ptolemaic dynasty that grew the fastest and grew the strongest initially. And he took control of Egypt as well as, again, this area they fought over all the time, the nation of Israel. Verse 6 says, and at the end of some years, they, the north and the south, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, they shall join forces. Ptolemy and Seleucus died within 2 years of each other. And after their death, their successors decided to form an alliance through marriage. It was a pretty common thing to do in the day. And so verse 6 continues, they shall join forces for the daughter. Her name is Bernice, if you want to write that down. The daughter of the king of the south, who is Ptolemy II, shall go to the king of the north, who's Antiochus II, to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of her authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. Now, this is complicated. I'm not going to lie to you, but I'm going to try to make this soap opera as easy as possible to understand. To form an alliance between these two dynasties, Ptolemy II, the loving father that he was, says, let me give you my daughter so that you can marry Bernice, my daughter. And so she married Antiochus II. But Antiochus II was already married. Now, all the way through here, I can't help, when I was studying this, I'm like, if we just, instead of put this in the Middle East and said this took place in a hospital, and we changed this guy's name to Gregory and her name to Suzanne, we have a soap opera, okay? And so Ptolemy II says, I'm going to give you my daughter Bernice to marry you, Antiochus II, and then we'll have this alliance. But Antiochus II was already married to a woman named Laodice. And so he marries her anyway. But when Ptolemy II died, Antiochus II put away this new wife, Bernice, that he got from him, and said, I never really loved her anyway, went back to his first wife. But wait a minute, Antiochus II, his first wife, Laodice, didn't trust him anymore. You put me away once, now you want me back? Not so fast, mister. She poisoned Antiochus II, the guy in the north, and for good measure, she had Bernice, the second wife, killed, and all of her servants. And so once Antiochus II and his mail-order bride Bernice were off the scene, Laodice, now in the north, made her son Seleucus II the king. You got it? All right, this is easy stuff, right? You guys got all this? We're just getting started. Verse 7. But from a branch of her roots, Bernice's, one shall arise in his, Ptolemy II's place, who shall come with an army, enter the fortress of the king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. Okay, Bernice from the south married Antiochus II from the north. Bernice was then killed by Antiochus. I just feel like I'm retelling the soap opera I just watched. Bernice was then killed by Antiochus's first wife, But Bernice had a brother. Hold on just a minute. Not so fast, Mr. Antiochus. It's a branch, as it says here, of her roots. She had a brother, also a son of Ptolemy II, and his name was, what do you think? Ptolemy III. Yeah, these guys are really original, right? Ptolemy III, being the outstanding brother that he was, had to revenge his sister's death, and so he then invades Syria. Now remember, Israel's caught up in the middle of all of this drama. Who likes being in the middle of drama? No one. No one likes that. Okay, so Ptolemy III invaded Syria to the north, gave them a beat down. It's what history is called the Third Syrian War. I think there's 6 of them. Now, verse 8. And he, Ptolemy III, shall also carry their gods, the North's gods, captive to Egypt. And let me just put a little in parentheses here. If you can carry your God, instead of him carrying you, your God's too small. So he carried their gods captive to Israel with their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold. And so he took their ball and went home, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. Okay, now I'm just going to quickly sum up what we've just read. And tell me if this doesn't sound like all my children. Ptolemy III outlived his sister's husband's first wife's son, Seleucus II. That's what it's saying. Let me say that again. Ptolemy III outlived his dead sister's husband's first wife's son. Okay, by 4 years. I'm going to quiz you guys on this later. Chronologically, this brings us to 241 BC. It's the height of the Ptolemaic dynasty's reign. Not only now, he went up, grabbed all their precious metals, their gods too. Not only do they have the wealth of the north included in their empire, they controlled almost all of the Middle East at this point, including, of course, Israel. Verse 9. Also, the king of the north, Seleucus II, shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. Isn't this amazing that Daniel's writing all of this in advance? We can't go to the history books and write it as clearly as this, right? It's complicated. But Daniel is receiving all this and recording it for us. Now, verse 10, however, his sons, this is Seleucus II's son, shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. Okay, now back in the north, Seleucus II has 2 sons that would become rulers. The first one's name was, what do you think? Seleucus III, yeah. They're not real original, these guys. But he reigned for less than 2 years before he had a run-in with one of his own soldiers' swords. Sure, it was an accident. But Seleucus II's other son was a man by the name of Antiochus III, or Antiochus the Great. Not related to Cyrus the Great, not related to Darius the Great, or Alexander the Great, but that was his title. So, Antiochus III now, are you guys doing okay? Okay. Antiochus III now launched another counterattack against the south. This is what's called the Fourth Syrian War. And in the process, again, he reclaimed Israel as part of his empire. And he now took a lot of territory all the way down to what we would call the Gaza Strip. Well, guess what? South doesn't like that. They got to get back at that. They're not going to give that stuff away. So, verse 11, the king of the south, now we're at Ptolemy IV, shall be moved with rage and go out and fight with him, with the king of the north, Antiochus III, who shall muster a great multitude. But the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. This is called the Battle of Raphia in 217 BC. Verse 12, when he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. Israel, again, of course, is right in the middle of all of this again, and now they're in control of the Ptolemaic Empire down in the south again. Verse 13, for the king of the north will return and muster a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. And they're not talking John Deere here. War elephants is what they were really into at the time. So Antiochus III was defeated by Ptolemy. Which Ptolemy are we on? 4, I believe. You just nodded yes, Spencer? Did you? That's awesome. Way to go. I can't even pay attention that well. Okay. So he is defeated by Ptolemy IV, and for, I think it's 14 years, for several years, he's off. He's like, okay, I'm going to ignore the south for a while, and I'm going to set my sights to the east. And he expanded his empire again, grew his military, only to come again after the end of those years to face off with the south again. Now, verse 14, in those times, many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also, violent men of your people, of Daniel's people, these are Jews, shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall. So, if you're following with me so far, Israel is under control of the south. They sided with the north, thinking that they would be freed from the heavy taxes that the south is imposing. And so this guy is raising himself up in the north, and Antiochus III, like, we're going to side with you because we're sick of these guys in the south. So, verse 15, the king of the north shall come and build a siege mound and take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. Verse 16, but he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land, Israel, with destruction in his power. So Ptolemy, now the fifth, and his generals were defeated in the 5th Syrian war. This takes us to 195 BC. Verse 17, he shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus he shall do, and he, Antiochus III, shall give him, Ptolemy V, the daughter of women to destroy it, Ptolemy's kingdom, but she shall not stand with him, Antiochus III, or before him. Are you guys doing okay, honestly? I'm like, this is so tricky, okay? So after this battle, Antiochus here, the third, again, decides to consolidate and strengthen his power by again attempting to make an alliance with Egypt. And part of that peace treaty, this time it's Antiochus the third in the north, says, I'm going to give you my daughter, whose name was Cleopatra the first, in marriage to Ptolemy V, who was a 16-year-old kid at the time. Now, this isn't the Cleopatra. This is the Cleopatra's like great-grandmother. But Antiochus hoped that if I give my daughter to Ptolemy V in the south, she'll remain loyal to me, and all go well, and I'll have a spy on the inside. But instead, she liked younger men. And so she was actually in and fell in love with Ptolemy V, and the alliance backfired. So it says she shall not stand with him or before him. And this is just incredible. This is so detailed. All these historical facts, 100% true, talking about dynasties and rulers and wives and daughters and marriages. And it's all hundreds of years before it took place. And this is why critics hate chapter 11. But after this failed plan of having his daughter act as a spy in the south, verse 18 says, he shall turn his face to the coastlands west and shall take many. But a ruler shall bring a reproach against them to an end. With the reproach removed, he shall turn back on him. So it's revealed to Daniel that Antiochus III would continue to fight and head west towards the coastland, set his sights on isles that are in the Mediterranean. Of course, the area of Tyre and Sidon, if you're familiar with Old Testament, very important ports on the coast. And the land of Israel then at this point would never be in control of the south again. He's like, okay, I'm not going to try to attack you down there. I'm just going to hang out here for a while and head west. I'm going to go towards the Mediterranean. But he pushed too far west, too soon. And although he was initially helped by someone you may have heard of in your history books as well, a man by the name of Hannibal, not Hannibal Lecter or Hannibal from the 18, this is Hannibal with the war elephants. He pushed too far too soon, and he found himself overmatched by this young upstart empire called the Roman Empire. Yeah, you're like, you have gone so fast so far. I don't have no idea. Romans? Yeah, that's right, Romans. And so it says here there was a specific ruler. This guy's name was, not that you need more information, but Lucius Cornelius Scipico, not Serpico, totally different. And the battle was called the Battle of Magnesia. Now, he was defeated by the Romans in this Battle of Magnesia, and he was forced to pay a war indemnity of 15,000 talents, which was a lot of shekels for the time, and he didn't have it on him. So, verse 19, then he, Antiochus III, shall turn his face towards the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. After being pushed back by Rome and bankrupt from this campaign of going to the coastlands and heading west, he is killed because he had to pay back the Romans this 15,000 talents. And so his way to come up with that was to raid Babylonian temples. Again, this is all in history. You could find this all in Wikipedia. And he was killed in doing so. They didn't like him raiding the temples, and so he was killed. But the empire is still bankrupt. And so his son, Seleucus IV, came to power. Verse 20, there shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, again, the land of Israel, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. It wasn't long before Seleucus IV was assassinated. And his brother, who we've already read about, I've already mentioned in Daniel 8, takes the throne. He is the 8th king of the Seleucid dynasty, and his name is Antiochus IV, or Antiochus Epiphanes, which means Antiochus the illustrious one. But he wasn't illustrious. He was vile. Verse 21, and in his place shall arise a vile person, to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. Antiochus Epiphanes is truly one of the most vile people ever to live in human history. And he is a sneak preview of one that is to come that is even more vile, and that is the coming Antichrist. Now it says they will not give him the honor of royalty. He wasn't the rightful heir to the throne. His brother had been on the throne and assassinated, but his son, Seleucus, I can't remember which Seleucus that were on the fourth, his son at the time was imprisoned by Rome, and the man that assassinated him was a man by the name of Heliodorus, and he briefly took the throne, totally different. But Antiochus Epiphanes, this vile one here, convinced other local regents and rulers to come to his aid, and by treachery he took the throne for himself. So, he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. So he got there by smooth talk. Now verse 22 through 24 describe his rise to prominence. With the force of a flood, they should be swept away before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. And so he had several victories against the south, and it's here it seems to hint at that he had the high priest in Jerusalem remove the prince of the covenant. But on the surface, his policy was always friendly, it was kind, it was flattering. All the while he plotted against people. Verse 23, after the league was made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. He shall enter peaceably even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. So again, it's describing just the character of this guy. He'd flatter you, come in peaceably, but then he'd turn his back to, he'd hit you in the back, stab you in the back without warning. Now, verses 25 through 27 emphasize his struggles with the south, with the Egyptians, with the Ptolemaic dynasty. Verse 25, he shall stir up his power, as Antiochus Epiphanes, and his courage against the king of the south. This is now Ptolemy VI, Philometor, that's his name, don't wear it out, with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, who is going to be the Romans. But he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. He shall not stand is Antiochus Epiphanes. Yes, verse 26, those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. Both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. This is all according to the appointed time. God is still in control. Leaders come and go, but this is his story. He's the one that has written this, and it's playing out exactly as God said it would. But it talks about here in these last verses how Antiochus and Ptolemy, they dealt deceitfully with each other. But the fact was, although Antiochus Epiphanes at this point had some major victories, he was now coming under the thumb of this Roman Empire. He had already been defeated by him once, and they are gaining in strength. And so after he goes to the south and tries to incite a civil war down there by pitting the two Ptolemaic brothers against each other, he's intercepted by a Roman ambassador whose name was Gaius Popilius Laenius. Gaius told him, stay out of Egypt. You don't want any part of this, because you're going to have a part of us if you go down there and mess with them. And to that, Antiochus Epiphanes replied, well, let me think about it for a little bit, Let me get with my friends and I'll get back to you. And Gaius said, here's the deal. He took his sword, drew a circle in the sand around Antiochus Epiphanes and said, I want your answer before you leave that circle. In other words, you are leaving the south, or you're also going to start a war with Rome. And I don't think you want that. And so Antiochus Epiphanes withdrew, but what's important for us to remember here is that he was totally humiliated in doing so. Verse says in verse 28, while returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant, so he shall do damage and return to his own land, Syria. So he's on his way back to Syria. It said his heart is stirred, his heart is moved against the things of God. And on his way back, sure enough, history tells us that he looted the temple in Jerusalem and he killed many people. Verse 29, at the appointed time. Who appoints the time? God does. Sunday school answer, yes, God does. He shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the later. For ships from Cyprus, Roman ships, shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. He's turned away and humiliated by Rome now really a third time here, and in doing so he becomes incensed. He's enraged and says, he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. And so Daniel's being told, can you imagine just receiving this? Just on the surface, it blows your mind. But now Daniel's told about these people that he loves, that he cares, and he's been praying about so much. And he's told that this vile person is going to come along, Daniel, and he's going to encourage God's people to turn their back on him. And he's going to show favoritism to those who say, yeah, I'll abandon God. I'll abandon his ways. That guy is coming, Daniel. And again, it's just a sneak preview of the coming Antichrist. Verse 31, and forces or military presence shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. When he returned, again, super humiliated, History records he killed 60,000 Jews. He sold 40,000 into slavery. He placed guards around the temple area, prevented worship. He had circumcision outlawed, all of these things. And again, keep in mind that Daniel's receiving this prophecy. There is no holy place yet. There is no temple yet. The temple had been razed, R-A-Z-E-D, by Babylon and hadn't even been rebuilt yet. And yet Daniel's saying this guy's going to come into the Holy of Holies and he's going to defile the temple, which is exactly what he did. He would place in the temples, it says here, the abomination of desolation. And Antiochus Epiphanes erected either an idol of Zeus or himself, we're not exactly sure, and demanded that it be worshipped. He would also go on to sacrifice a pig, which is like the most unclean animal to the Jew there is, on the holy altar, and then he forced, under threat of death, the priest to drink the blood of the pig. And so he's one of the most insane rulers in history. Now, we're almost done here. Verse 32, those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery. Daniel's told there's going to be some Jews that follow him. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. You might want to mark that down. If you've lost at all so far this morning, would you please get this last part of verse 32? The people who know their God shall be strong, not can be. They shall be strong and carry out great exploits. That truth has not changed. I don't care if this is 2,000-year-old material that we're writing. The truth here is timeless, that those who know their God, not those who know about God, those who know their God shall be strong. And Daniel is told here that the spiritually mature will resist the flattery and the favoritism that Antiochus is going to provide them, and they're going to go on to do great exploits. And the great exploits is resisting him. The great exploit is not backing down, by being strong and secure in your relationship with the Lord. Now, there were definitely some great exploits that took place when the abomination that causes desolation was placed in the temple. It was the final straw for some of the priesthood and some of incredibly brave Jews who, under the leadership of a man by the name of Judas Maccabeus, which means Judas the Hammer. It sounds like a UCF name. I love that. Judas the Hammer. Yeah. He led what's known as the Maccabean revolt. Eventually the temple was cleansed and rededicated, and that is what's celebrated in Hanukkah. After that point, and he overthrew the strong arm of Antiochus Epiphanes, Israel was not controlled by the north or the south for about 80 years. They were independent. From 142 BC to 63 BC, no one was telling them what to do until the Romans finally came in 63 BC. Verse 34, and those of the people who understand shall instruct many. Yet for many days they shall fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. Now when they fall, they shall be aided with little help, but many shall join with them by intrigue. And so Daniel, again, he's told here, this is going to be an incredibly difficult time. People are going to turn and follow this leader, but there's also going to be a time of spiritual revival in the midst of this difficult season. It says in verse 35 that some of those of understanding shall fall, to refine them, purify them, make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. Daniel, God's going to use this time of suffering, this time that's really hard to hear about your people. He's going to allow some of those who are faithful to him to follow through, to go through these difficult times, to be refined and purified. And this is true for us. I don't know what you're going through right now. And here I got to add some application to this, because I know that this is an area of application for all of us at some time or other. We all go through difficult things, difficult times, difficult seasons, times that are physically, emotionally, in relationships. They're challenging. And these are times that the Lord wants to use. We're told in 1 Peter 1 that in this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials. That, there's a purpose to it. There's a purpose in your trial. That the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though faith, is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Daniel, this is going to happen. It's not a surprise to me. And there is still an appointed time to come. And this appointed time to come is this after verse 35. And there Daniel received from the angel, fast forward thousands of years into the future. And as I mentioned before, we're living right there, right after verse 35 and before verse 36. But he's told that what happened with Antiochus Epiphanes was not the end. He is going to serve as a type of another ruler who will come, who will be described in the following verses. And this is going to be someone that's more vile, more insane, more treacherous. He'll use more flattery. He'll show more favoritism, and he'll have his own abomination of desolation. And that is the Antichrist, and we'll talk about that more next week. Now, you guys have been great. You've been patient. You've been great students. The Lord didn't put this in here to bore us. All things written beforehand were written for our learning, that through the patience and comfort of Scripture, we might have hope. And so, maybe you're here this morning, though, and you're like, I don't know. There's no way something that exact. Basically, what I did to you is I read you Wikipedia and the Bible at the same time, okay? And maybe you're thinking, like, there's no way the Bible could be that accurate. They could tell all those things in advance. And I think I side with the critics. No way that was written before the events took place. And if you'll bear with me, to put it bluntly, I want to tell you that your promise is not with the book of Daniel. Your promise is with Jesus. That's where the promise is, because it's as though Jesus spoke of all the passages that people really have a bone to pick with. Jesus goes out of his way and says, let me talk about that and verify that very thing. He talked about Adam and Eve being the first people as real, literal people. What do we hear talk about? What's criticized? Creation, marriage. Jesus goes right there and says, let me talk about that. Let me talk about Adam and Eve. He also says, let me talk to you about Noah and the flood. What's the next thing that people talk about? There's no way all those animals could fit on the ark. There's no way there was a global flood. Jesus says, let me talk about that. Let me address that as well and put my seal of approval on that. What's the next thing people talk about all the time? Jonah, swallowed by a fish. Jesus talked about Jonah and being swallowed by a fish as a real, literal event. And he also talked about Daniel as real and factual and literal. And especially, specifically, he talked about Daniel chapter 11, as incredible and as amazing as this is. Jesus himself said in Matthew 24, verse 15, when you see the abomination of desolation, this future abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place. Jesus validated and critiqued the most questioned portions of Scripture, including the writings of Daniel, the things that we read this morning, the things that we were bored with. Maybe not. Jesus says, yeah, I read that, and I verify that. I put my seal of approval on that. He says, Daniel, it's true what he wrote. He was a real person. He was a real prophet. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to stop there this morning, but I want us, how do we avoid just having this morning be a history lesson? Because that was a lot of information, right? I'm teaching it, and I'm like, what did I say that guy's name was again? You know, it's a lot of information. So how do we avoid just having this be school work? I want you to remember, again, that as Jesus said, this wasn't history when Daniel wrote it. It was yet future. These 130 prophecies that covered 375 years of future events. And here's what we can take home. If those over 130 events from a 375-year period that is found in these 35 verses can be verified as true as simply by going to Wikipedia and looking them up, what God has to say about our future about the future of Israel, about coming cataclysmic world events, and the rest of the pages of this book is 100% guaranteed as well. God's not going to bat 1,000 in these 35 verses and strike out in the rest. He always bats 1,000. And so, again, if you have tuned out, we can trust the things that Jesus says. And I want to leave us with one of his promises that he said. He told his disciples, he tells us in John 14, "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. And where I go, you know, and the way you know." Thomas, maybe we're like, well, I don't know. Well, Thomas helps you out. Thomas said to him, "Lord, we do not know where you're going, and how can we know the way?" Jesus said to him, "I am the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father except through me." As verifiable and as certain as these are facts now of human history, this is true. In Daniel chapter 11, God is just showing off. Here's my track record. Here's so you know I can be trusted. 100% correct 100% of the time. And also, I want to let you know, Christian, that I'm coming back. That the kingdom is coming and that heaven is a real place. And so I hope that you don't leave here thinking, I just got only a good history lesson. I hope you leave here knowing that our God is true and his promises are true. Amen? Let's pray.